Curlew Country and other curlew recovery organisations often get asked why, when curlew are nesting on farmland, breeding on farmland, can farmers not just cease their agricultural activities and wait until the curlews have left their land. So we've put together this video, which is a presentation, and it's a story of what, based loosely on a situation that happened in Curlew Country this year in 2024. But to be honest, it could have happened anywhere in Curlew Country, or indeed anywhere on similar farmland. And Curlew Country is a lowland population hotspot, and it's a hotspot because there are only a handful of populations of this size outside upland areas. So the fields that we've got here, which are all just parts of larger land holdings, larger farms, have different land managers and are being used for different purposes. So we've got fields down at the bottom here, bordered in blue and in yellow, and these are all hay crops. So the livestock will have been excluded from them in April time, springtime, and that's so that the grass can grow and the farmers can take a crop, preserve a grass crop on which they can feed their livestock, mainly cattle and sheep, during the winter months when grass isn't growing and they're unable to get food from other sources. So this is a homegrown source of feed. Some farmers feed their stock corn or specially produced food as well, but this is the best value stock. And a thing to hold in mind is that in livestock grassland areas like ours, farmers are on fairly low average income. So DEFRA figures show about £20,000 over in recent years, and many of them are working at other jobs to supplement their incomes. They all vary, but that's quite a common figure in terms of incomes in these areas. So these fields are shut up for hay, as farmers would call it, livestock excluded from them. This field up here, bordered in orange, is a wet field. We've shown that by the juncus or rushes there. And the wet ground means that the farmer can't, sometimes during the year, sometimes through much of the year, get any agricultural machinery onto that land to carry out agricultural operations. So he grazes it with cattle and sheep. And at the time of our story, which was about 2/3 of the way through June, it was actually being grazed by cows and calves. And then the land over here, shaded a lighter green colour, is actually what's known as common land. And we have quite a lot of common land in Curlew Country, mainly hill moorland, but the birds are actually not nesting on that land, although they would have done so historically. This is flat, species-rich grassland, and it's land on which the farmers from the surrounding area will have what's known as commons grazing rights, so rights to graze livestock on that land, sheep and cattle. And at the time of the story, the cattle were extensively grazing. So in these fields, we have 3 nests. This first nest here, so in sequence that the eggs were actually laid, this nest, the poor parents incubated 2 term and beyond, and then abandoned the nest. And when we examined the eggs had failed. So they failed to develop. And this nest too, the male at this nest was one of the Curlew Country 2019 Head Started chicks, and this was its 3rd attempt at breeding back in the Curlew Country landscape. 4 eggs, 3 eggs hatched. This nest here was the last nest in our story. 3 eggs, 2 hatched. This is on the common land, quite nice species-rich ground, lots of invertebrates, wet areas in which the adults could probe their bills, and a bit of cover as well, although also nature-rich for mesopredators. This hayfield did not have lots of specially agriculturally bred grass in it. It was quite natural grassland, species-rich, invertebrate-rich, and again wet. So the birds stayed here for quite a long period of time, and this brood stayed here. This brood arrived about 4 to 5 days after nest 2, stayed here for about a week, and then moved on to the cattle pasture. Now, we think that the research shows that birds are probably most likely to move to in order to find good food for the chicks. But of course, there could have been a threat over here. And we've seen foxes hunting here in daylight in other years. And another reason might be, and we see birds moving on to land grazed by livestock quite often. So the feces are invertebrate rich and literally rich picking for those chicks. So that could have been another reason, and that juncus is providing good cover up there. And not long after this brood had moved into this field, they were joined by this brood. And not long after that, they were joined by 6 adult failed nesters. So these are birds that have had 1 to 3, possibly more attempts at nesting. They've then lost body conditions, so are no longer fertile. Their time's running out in which to lay eggs and then rear the chicks, and they're gathering together and they set off on migration, and they're stopping at good foraging areas to build up their energy to make that big journey. There were 6 of them, and they joined the 2 sets of adult parents and started collaborating and co-parenting, particularly to alert the broods to threats, but especially also to go up and fend off danger from avian predators. And this is obviously entirely instinctive and would be more prevalent in an upland area where birds nest closer together, say in one field they're more loosely colonial, and the birds would cooperate and were closer together in order to do that. So they have a sort of curlew critical mass. Our birds, on the other hand, have got these big fragmented overlapping territories, and they're nesting here one year, here the next year, here the next year, over here the next year, here the and the nest that's nested here this year is nesting there, and so on. So it's not, we're not looking at a similar situation in that respect. After a while, these birds started to disperse a bit, so they were foraging in 1s and 2s and 3s and fields round and about, and sometimes they come back into this field, but eventually they left. And at around the same time, we noticed that this brood had also been lost and that the adults had left, so we assumed that they got together with these birds and left. And we also noticed that the female from this brood had left, and that's completely natural. The female leaves before the male, who stays guarding the chicks until they're nearly fully fledged, but in fact he leaves just before them as well, out to go off on migration, out to winter roosts. And very alarmingly, this family had moved into this field here, which had just been cut for hay. Family had moved into this field and hay had been cut. And how do we know that? We know that because Caleb Stradling, our assistant ornithologist, was out following the broods daily, and this was partly for the Curlew Solutions trial when he wanted to know more about the success or causes of failure of those broods, but also for his dissertation that undertaken as part of his MSc with the University of East Anglia, where he was looking at how different broods use habitat. He saw that this field had been cut for hay, rushed to see me in the office. My heart sank because I knew that this was a farming family who also supplemented their income with other jobs during the day, and that they were going to be difficult to get hold of for that reason in the day. But I said I'd start on that, and he went back out on his activities and saw that the farmer was turning the hay. And that old saying, make hay while the sun shines, is literal. So to make hay, a farmer needs a period of 4 to 5 days, perhaps even longer, where he can on one day cut the hay, and then on the following sequence of days, turn the hay in dry, warmish weather so that it dries out. And he needs to do that until he's satisfied that it's dry enough to bale up and store safely. And all of that needs to be done in dry weather. But combined with that also, just like when we are eating our plant foods, so fruit and vegetables, we want fruit and vegetables to be ripe, but that's also likely to coincide at a time of maximum nutritional value. And the farmer is trying to get a crop of grass that's of maximum nutritional value to feed his livestock over the winter months when grass is not growing. So there's no alternative grass for them. And the same is true in terms of silage with nutritional value. Silage is a slightly different crop, so instead of being dried out to preserve it, it's a wetter crop when harvested, although still harvested where possible in better weather. And it's preserved through fermentation, so the natural sugars in the grass ferment the crop, and there might be more. So the silage times can be different. It tends to be a more agriculturally improved grass crop, and the grass reaches a different growth stage at different times of year, and it's cut several times a year. But with hay, you get one go, and that's it. And this poor farmer is choosing here between his livelihood and a curlew family. He's told that there's a curlew family here. He doesn't want to harm it. He's heard the curlews over here and here, but he didn't know they're in this field. And that's quite understandable because this curlew family, the adult male, will have been telling his chicks to get out of danger's way. And by that, he may have heard a tractor coming from a long way away or a latch of a gate, and that would have signaled danger to him, and he will have told these chicks to hunker down, which they will have been doing up against the rows of hay, where they will have been partially hidden, and then he will have been acting as if there was no family there at all. So nonchalantly to take that threat away, take the attention away from his chicks. So the poor farmer didn't know they were there. He doesn't want to harm the curlew. That's one reason for being upset. Another reason is that he's got this limited window of time, fair weather, in which to cut his hay. And next reason, he's actually taken a day off work to do that, and he can't change that. So what he actually did is he agreed with us that he would turn the rows from this side of the field. The Curlew family were here, and Caleb would then have the opportunity to try and quietly work the Curlew family back into this field. That was the only place where there was an obvious escape to. Not ideal, because this is the field that they come from. So they come out of there for a reason. But that's actually what happened. And then a further twist to this tale is that this farmer, who had the field next door, which was also destined to be a hay crop, had a fairly dreadful experience in the previous year, which is 2023. So this field has an agri-environment scheme on it, and that means that the grass in this field cannot be cut until the middle of July, which can be quite a traditional time well, it's probably one of the latest times actually that you want to be cutting hay. All weather dependent, of course. I mean, sometimes it's much later than that. And in 2023, which was also a wet year, 2024 was a wet year, but 2023, the middle of July came along and it was raining, and it rained and it rained and it rained, and the farmer lost his entire crop, lost any nutritional value from this crop at all, struggled to get onto the land and remove his crop. All of this cost him a lot of money, and he had no food for his livestock over the winter months. And he had had the extraordinary opportunity to acquire the management of this adjacent field, which he hadn't had in 2024. So he'd done that so that he had an insurance or a safeguard. He had his field, which was in an agri-environment scheme for curlew, and he had a safeguard so that he knew that he wouldn't lose his crop on account of not being able to cut this crop until much later, and he could take hay from this field and deliver for both curlews and himself. But of course, sadly, it hasn't worked. The agri-environment scheme here is just field-based. It can't be transferred to this field or to another land management. And the curlews don't know that they're supposed to nest in this field or move their broods into this field and stay there all the time. That's simply not how they're operating on our farmland. As I said, they could be nesting anywhere in different years and moving anywhere. Although in upland areas they might well stay in one field, and several pairs might be in one field. To finish off our cocktail, we're going to put an umbrella, a traditional curlew umbrella, into the cocktail. It's a bit of a play on words because we talk about curlews being an umbrella species, and by that we mean that beneficial management for curlew will deliver multiple additional benefits. So things like water quality and soil quality and greater biodiversity, a whole host of other species. And at landscape scale, these are landscape birds. This is just a little bit of our landscape, but this bird represents an adult male nesting on the common some years ago, not the one that was nesting there this year, but an adult bird to which we affixed a GPS tag. And that GPS tag showed us that this bird was flying 7 kilometers away to roost and to forage. And it just shows that this is a landscape that needs to be cooperating, where everyone needs to be collaborating and working for curlew. And whilst there are landscape scale agri-environment schemes, not for curlew, so we know it's possible, and we also know that there are lots of great people trying to get these schemes as close as they can to benefit our curlews, but we're not there yet. And there is hope, and we need that hope. Our birds are diminishing in population size on farmland all the while, and it's becoming quite radical and quite urgent now. So fingers crossed.